that report from Cimini was Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, and AJ Brown. All three of those guys coming into the last year of their contract, which makes you wonder, will all three of them be back on their teams? At this point, it feels like the level of which some of these guys get traded, maybe one of them gets traded, but would the Jets view all three? Are the Jets viewing them the same way? Like they're in the same category in terms of this conversation? Or are they actually in the same category?
I would say this, though. Seattle, every player they've had of DK Metcalf's caliber, they extended and they built around over Pete and John's time, right? Russell, all the defensive guys, that they drafted that became stars. Earl, Cam, Richard, Bobby, obviously Russell, Tyler Lockett had multiple contracts there. He is a star-driven coach, elite players he extends. Now, it's ugly when he gets rid of them, but he gets rid of them like Andy does with the elite guys after the second contract. So you would say, based on his history, there would be no sense that he would do this. John Robinson, I saw it before we hopped on, at the owners' meeting says the game plan is to make A.J. Brown a Titan for a long period of time, whatever that takes. I believe him. I mean, look at his history. He hasn't been like the sweet players he drafts, he keeps. Deebo Samuel, you would say the one team of this group that has a history of, now, they didn't pick him, they inherited DeForest Buckner. But I would argue DeForest Buckner is like inheriting, Jim Harbaugh inherited Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis, and there was never a thought of getting rid of either one of those.
He's my guy now.
So they inherited DeForest by their sweet team. He was the team captain, the team spokesman, and arguably one of their top 2 or 3 players on the team, and they traded him after they made a Super Bowl run. 4-pick 13. And that was non-Belichick, would you say one of the most, to me, ultimately, Devontae, I don't want to be here anymore. That's happened before. Tyreek, that happens all the time. Not all the time, but teams, cap space, older player, pivot. The DeForest Buckner thing was pretty shocking. That was going to be his first contract extension. Team captain on a sweet team. Great guy. Traded him for pick 13. That was a pretty wow moment. So I would say they're the one team in this history that you go, well, they've done it before. Right? Because eventually it was after Bill had done it about 3 times, you never know with Bill. Bill just, beside Tom, everyone's fair game. And even by the end, it was he tried to trade Gronk. Now, granted, he was an older version, but it's if I see a report over the next week, they've had discussions because Deebo is making it difficult to meet in a number, or his agent is, I would say that's understandable based on their history. Now, it's only been one guy, but that one guy was a pretty transcendent move for a franchise.
And that guy was, I would say, it's easy right now to believe that Deebo is a sure thing as a player because he was so good last year that everyone fell in love. The whole league. He was one of the biggest stories in the NFL as things got rolled. As the Niners started winning games. DeForest Buckner's body of work was more predictable than Deebo's was at that point in time, right? In terms of here is what he's done, and here's what we believe it will continue to be. Deebo's it's a little more of a question, just given how short his track record is at this point. If he had done what he did last year for 3 straight years, this is a little bit of a different conversation, right?
DeForest was the 7th pick in the draft, and when they traded him, he had missed 1 career game. And you see the guy in person, of all the NFL players you've ever stood around, he has to be one of the most, him and Eric are 2 of the most unique players you'll ever see, right?
They stand out. We used to always comment when we'd see them at Niners camp, these guys on an NFL field are extreme outliers. Extreme outliers.
So he had missed 1 game, and he was a top 10 pick. Right? Now, I understand that your value, what your pick is, but ultimately Deebo fell for a reason. He had some injury questions. That was the knock on him. Injuries. Because I think when he played, everyone loved him. They loved him more than these other 2 guys, which I think the cool part about all 3 of these guys is all SEC guys. Obviously, AJ and DK were teammates. Quote unquote, fell in the draft where receivers clearly go pretty high and all made Pro Bowls and all are really sweet. But Deebo, I would say, was viewed as the best prospect of the 3 coming out of college, but had all the injuries. And just 2 years ago, he came into camp out of shape. So to me, AJ, I've never heard a bad thing about. DK, I think people around the league think he's a little diva-ish. But don't get it twisted. I did the math before we hopped on.
Give me the numbers.
Deebo has 167 catches through 3 years. AJ has 185, so that's 18 more. DK has 216 catches. Deebo, 10 career passing touchdowns. AJ,
Receiving.
Receiving. He caught from a passer. AJ, 24, has 14 more. DK has 19 more. He has 29 career passing, receiving touchdowns. Now, the game changers, Deebo does have the 11.
So Deebo's 21 career touchdowns, AJ Brown's 25, and DK's 29.
But the other thing is DK has 3 in the playoffs. AJ has 2 in the playoffs. And Deebo has 2 in the playoffs. So it's not like these guys Deebo, no, these other guys have fucking dominated in January. Those guys have been more productive than Deebo. Deebo's production was unlike anything we ever saw. But again, it was shot like a rocket ship for about 10 games. Say what you want about DK, and I'm not the biggest, I would not trade for DK. I would not feel comfortable giving him $20 million a year.
I'd rather have Deebo than DK. I'll say that.
But his resume speaks for itself. It's a dominant resume.
Playing with Russell Wilson, as someone pointed out in the chat.
Yeah.
To be fair. It was a good match for him, right? He would not have put those numbers together playing with the 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo.
He made some plays on quick screens taking him to the house.
That's true.
I think we all agree he's a physical freak.
And maybe the Niners would just throw jump balls to DK in a way they don't throw to other receivers with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Now, I would say the best quote-unquote receiver in this class, I would put AJ on a clear tier as the number one. We saw him, right? When the Niners
we had this
Titans,
conversation on that day.
He was a monster. Now, you could argue Deebo is one of the best quote-unquote football players in the league. But all three of them have some pretty easy arguments, right? And Deebo's more my value to you. AJ's just I could put together 5 more years of just being could I be the best receiver in the league one day? And DK's my resume speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I'd say one day for AJ Brown, his thing is I'm playing with Ryan Tannehill. We're not exactly the most dynamic passing offense. Now, he can throw the ball down the field. I'm not saying Tannehill stinks, but he's not playing with Russell Wilson either, right?
Here's what I know. The Niners would not trade Deebo straight up for DK. Seattle, who knows? Maybe they'd just be over the diva-ish. The Titans would definitely say no, DK straight up for AJ. The Seattle might do that deal. The 49ers, I think you would think about, with Trey, a huge target as a thrower. If you got to pay one of them, AJ just bigger, stronger, more likely to go, the next 5 years, you would just bet on the physical history. The Titans 100% would say no, AJ straight up for Deebo. And I know, I've talked to the GM, he thinks Deebo's a star. It's not like they don't think Deebo's a stud. They watched him in that game, single-handedly try to keep that game close. But AJ, him and Justin Simmons are the best 2 players on their team, on a team that wins 12 games a year, every year, now for the last several years, right? They just go to the playoffs.
Yeah. But again, I
guess
do
they got
think
Derrick Henry too.
I do think when it comes to Deebo, the number one issue is that he has not been healthy all 3 years. I think if you get that guy you saw last year healthy for 3 years, which again, part of if he has to be a running back, that makes it harder to stay healthy, even though we did it last year, then it pushes him a lot closer to just as valuable as AJ Brown as doing it for 1 year.
Yeah, maybe better consistent. The one thing you would say from a throwing standpoint, the head coach has been very hit or miss with the trust of their quarterback. And the best year Jimmy, it felt like, was as a thrower would have been the Super Bowl year. Deebo was a rookie. Obviously, Russell's the best quarterback of this group. And even Tannehill, everyone shitting on him at the end of the year, has been pretty good, for a couple years throwing the football, right?
Yeah.
Statistically, he's been a top 10 passer in the league before. So
But I don't believe he's a top 10 quarterback. Whatever the numbers say.
Yeah. He's a legitimate starting quarterback year in, year out of a playoff team. But Jimmy might be too, but he can't stay on the field.
But my ultimate point on Deebo as it relates to this group of guys is I think he has a chance to be as good as AJ Brown, as on the same tier as AJ Brown in terms of the best receivers in the league. It feels to me, my concern is it's going to be a little harder for him to be that, given kind of the way it feels like he almost has to play to get let's say not equal production, but he's got 21 touchdowns. AJ Brown's got 25, so pretty equal production. Specifically him as a run, the collisions that he's involved with around the line of scrimmage do concern me.
If I tell you all three of these guys get contract extensions with their incumbent team, does any one of the three get over $50 million guaranteed?
It's tough. I mean, AJ Brown, I guess, could play this year without a new contract. They pick up a 5th-year option, and then
he's a second-round pick. They're all second-round picks.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. Of course,
they're just free.
AJ Brown feels like a first-round pick. Yeah, I could see AJ. The problem would be, even right now, he's not like if he had played 16 games last year and had 11 touchdowns like he did the year before.
How many games did he play last year?
13. We missed 4 games. 4 is not nothing.
What was his production last year?
AJ Brown was 5 touchdowns, 63 catches. I mean, that's not AJ Brown's production. Now, again, the team he plays for, the way they play, 52 receptions, 70 receptions, 63 receptions.
How many touchdowns the first 2 years, though?
8, and then 11, and then 5. And maybe Derrick Henry takes away some of his catches. His touchdowns, I mean, right?
Yeah, you probably don't throw as many fades within the 5 as you do just hand it off to the big fella.
But
Deebo's like, they hand me the ball down there.
I guess what I'm talking through with myself is like, that's true. I do feel like AJ could be a 50 million plus guy.
Yeah, to me, if one of them were to get traded, they'd be a lock to get well over that, right? Because if they're getting traded, that means someone's paying him a lot of money.
I mean, he hasn't played 16 games since his rookie year.
Who hasn't? AJ?
Mm-hmm.
So him and Deebo have that in common, both some injury issues. And both clearly are very valued in their own offense. DK is a little interesting, right? Because, he lost his greatest asset. So you could argue, like, to me, where I keep going back to, like, why I don't think he'd get traded, like, he still is one of their best players, and they're not trying to reset. Like, they're not blowing it up. They're not the Texans or the Lions, right? Even though that feels like that. They're not thinking like that. And he still gives them their best chance to win having him on the field.
I also would say, the game we saw from A.J. Brown on Thursday Night Football, this is kind of like you sign a guy because he had a great game against you, was by far – he had one other game on that level last year. Now, again, he had like 8 for 33 against the Chiefs and a touchdown. That's an amazing game. He had 7 for 91 against Buffalo. I mean, they needed it. They won by 3. That's a hell of a performance. 7 for 91 when everyone knows you're getting the ball. He had 10 for 155 against Indy, and he had 11 for 145, and it just felt like first down after first down, back-breaking first down against the 49ers. But, I
think it's fair to say when he's on, he's as unstoppable as an outside forces are in the NFL.
But he also had a 3-catch, a 4-catch, a 3-catch, an injury, a 3-catch, a no-catch, a 2-catch, a 4-catch. Whereas Deebo, I would say, of the 3 is the least reliant on external factors. Like, as your team gets worse, he becomes better because you don't need a clean pocket in 1.5 seconds to get him the football.
Who's that?
Deebo.
Yeah.
Like ultimately, a jack of all trades, master of none. Deebo kind of feels like he's a master and the jack of all trades. If he does what he did last year for multiple years, he is in some ways more valuable than these other 2 guys.
I do think that Deebo and even AJ, because of what they've meant to the team under their coach and their GM, and with the quarterback, and I know the Niners have a new young quarterback coming on, we think, their value is still really immense. Those guys know him so well. The DK thing, you could just argue, like, could I get pick 10? And then all of a sudden I got a couple really high picks, and I get to just get Garrett Wilson instead and kind of reset my salary cap with Seattle that's been a little out of whack. That would be maybe you talk yourself into it. To me, if one of these guys can get traded, my bet would be on DK, even though I think it's very, very unlikely. And it'd just be like, are the Jets really going to trade pick 10 for DK? Because I'll tell you this, if that happened, if you said DK Metcalf has been traded to the Jets, he's going to sign the Amari Cooper contract. Let's say 5 for 100, 60 guaranteed, 20 year, or whatever. Let's say it's 84. So even if it's like 21 a year to give him a little bump, I'd be like, I don't like that match. I think that's going to blow up in everyone's face.
Yeah. I also think, what are you doing if you're not giving your young? I mean, again, we're not talking about actually, like, would you necessarily trade Deebo in this conversation? We're talking about how he relates to these other players.
I'd understand why the Jets would do it, right?
Yeah, because again, Deebo actually, would Deebo make more sense for them than DK or AJ Brown, because their quarterback is a little bit erratic down the field and just throw the ball 2 yards down. Offensive coordinator, same type of guy. Like, I understood why Tyreek made sense for them. People said, well, he's small, and Zach Wilson. We talked about his kind of target radius is wide, his splatter chart or whatever you call it. If we gave him a gun and then pulled the thing close to us, he'd be bullets all over the place on the silhouette paper. But okay, then let's do what he does well and just get this guy the ball and get my playmakers in position to make plays.